Chromatose 1.2 is now available in the App Store. In this video, we'll walk through everything that's changed in this update. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the full walkthrough video that goes through everything that's possible in the app, and also the version 1.1 update video that covers all the updates in that version. In this video, we're only going to cover what's new in 1.2. So let's dive right in. I'm going to start with a factory preset patch that we've had already before in Chromatose. Let's say the escape pod. And I want to show you the coolest new feature in this release. So this one is called the tunnel effect. Scroll down to tunnel. Now you can add a tunnel to any patch that you have. So the first parameter we have is the phase parameter, which moves us backwards or forward through the tunnel. Spin allows us to add some rotation. Size changes the size of the tunnel. If you go all the way down, it just squishes everything into lines like this. Divisions is a bit like the kaleidoscope effect. It will add divisions around the outside, up to 16. Just be careful with this one. The default is 2. If you go down to 1 or less, you may just end up with circles like this. We can also adjust the density, which increases or decreases the number of iterations of the image being copied through the depth of the tunnel. And X and Y just allow us to move it up and down, left and right. And as usual in Chromatose, every single parameter is modulatable. So we can modulate the phase, for example, to fly through the tunnel. Same with the spin. We change the size lower until we get to warp speed. So this is pretty fun. And because it's Chromatose and everything is modular, you can always add another tunnel after your tunnel to get some interesting results. And we're going to go to another simple starting point patch in order to demonstrate the next effect that's new in version 1.2, which is the channels effect. So in computer graphics, every pixel that you see on the screen is comprised of 3 different values. So there's 3 different color channels that go into coloring a pixel. There's the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So with these level effects, we can adjust the level of the red. So if we pull this down, all the red is now gone from the image. Same thing with the green. And same thing with the blue. So if we bring all 3 of these down, we're left with nothing else, because white is comprised of equal amounts of red, green, and blue. When it's all the way up, we get white. If we bring the green down, we get the mixture of red and blue, which is magenta. Now, this is different than the levels effect, which has similar controls, one for red, green, and blue. And what these do is they do a relative boost or reduction of the red, green, and blue amount. So if I bring the red all the way down, the green all the way down, the blue all the way down, we still have a visible image because it's not an absolute reduction. It's just relative to the brightness of the image coming in. So this is slightly different and used for different purposes. So what we can also do now with the channels effect is we can adjust the offset. So if I use my fine tuner here, I can fine tune the red offset to just be slightly offset a little bit. And then we get this cool looking sort of chromatic aberration effect. But we can also pull it off quite a lot. And we can adjust the angle. So by default, the angle is going down. We can rotate the angle 360 degrees. And we can do the same thing with the green. But maybe I move the angle of the green to be up. and also with the blue. And we can modulate each of these angles to get some motion going. Maybe I'll do the green in the opposite direction of the red. And with the blue, maybe I'll use a sine wave so that it goes back and forth. So that's kind of cool. And you can see where they overlap, how the colors change and are different. And if I go back to my generator now, I can adjust the smoothness to create a little bit more of a flowy gradient sort of a look, which I quite like. And we can always add feedback to fill out the rest of the screen. So now we have some exciting new color manipulation possibilities that were not available before. It might seem like a simple effect, but try it in combination with lots of other things, and I think you'll find it's quite powerful. Let me remove this feedback. And the next thing I want to show you is something that's changed with the audio modulation system. So let's say I have the scale here and I want this to react to my voice. Just as before, we just turn on the audio modulation, and now you can see the scale of the object is moving relative to the volume of my voice. That's not new, but what is new is now we have a slew parameter, which we can adjust, which will smooth out the transition. So I find kind of lower values around here tend to work best. And you'll notice now that the transition is much smoother and much more fluid as compared to before, where without the slew, it's a bit jumpier. So that's a handy new feature for audio modulation. And the next thing I would like to discuss is the photo generator. So just as before, you could always load in an image with the photo generator. It could be your logo. Whenever you load an image, it gets tiled like this. And the tiling is, by default, it's mirrored. So you can see it doesn't work so well if you have some text, because Chromatose is spelled normally here, but then it's mirrored in reverse over here. We now have a new sample mode parameter. So if I tap this, I can basically disable the mirroring. So we still have the tiles, but without the mirroring. And then the third option is what's called clamp, which you'll notice you don't see any difference here because the edges of this image are fully transparent. So there's no edge to extend. But if we load a different photo, you'll see a little bit more clearly how this works. So the bottom of this image has pixels on it, so they get just pulled down and stretched down all the way to the edge of the screen. But if I go back to my logo, and we go back to one of these modes, I can show you the other new parameter, which is the spacing parameter, which allows us to add space between the tiles. So this is great if you, say, have your logo or some kind of image that you want to focus on without having tiles. You can just turn the spacing all the way up, and this will work up until a certain point with the scale. If you scale all the way down, you'll still see some of these, but I think for most use cases, it's probably good enough. Another change that we have, which is quite cool, let's say I wanted to rotate this image. We can rotate it with the knob here, but if I wanted fine-tune adjustment, I could tap it, get to the fine-tuner control. We can do fine-tune adjustments like this. But the problem I noticed was sometimes you just really want to get it at like an exact value, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to get it to be exactly like 45 degrees or something. So now there are these stepper buttons on the side. You can just tap and it will intelligently snap to rounded values depending on the range of the parameter. So because this parameter goes from minus 180 to positive 180, it knows to snap at the most commonly used round degrees. And of course, we can always zoom in for more fine-tune adjustments. And if we do that, it will just go up by 1. Zoom back out, and it goes back to the more coarser grained rounded number. things like scale, for example, only go from 0 to 1, so that goes in 0.1 increments. So I think this is just a lot more handy for dialing in specific values. There are also a few different bugs with the fine-tune control, which are now fixed. So I think this should be a lot better and easier to use now. Okay, for the next effect, I'm going to use a different photo. And with this photo, I'm going to add a reduce effect. And we're going to look at what's changed in the reduce effect. So just as before, you can dial up the pixelate knob and you can get a pixelation of your image. What's changed now though is you can change the shape of the pixel. Before it was just square, but now you can morph between squares and circles. And you can also invert the shape. So it's kind of like a cutout of the shape. And one thing to notice is if we have it inverted and we change the shape back to squares, like the inverted value of a square is just nothing, so you don't see anything. So be careful with that. You might black out everything. But what you can do to get around this is we can now add spacing in between the pixels, which alone has a pretty cool effect. We can then invert the squares and then we get outlines of the squares. If I go in closer here, I can show you the next thing, which is the smoothing parameter. So we can smooth out the squares or the circles. And quantization works exactly as it did before. But now with the smoothing, I think you get some interesting results because we have sort of little bands of rings where the smoothing is. So this is a lot of fun to play with. One thing that I would like to show you that can be interesting to do is to bring the pixelation amount kind of down so that the pixels are small. And we adjust the dry wet a little bit. Bring the smoothing down. And then let's add a little bit of motion to the image here so it's moving. Too much, go to 1/16. And we're gonna scale this back down. We're gonna reduce our spacing. So I think this looks pretty cool because we have sort of a pixelation effect on top of the source image, which gives us kind of like a dithered, like old school CRT TV scan kind of a aesthetic. Also combined with the quantization, it gives us some interesting results here. And then what I like to do also is to add a feedback effect after this. And I can show off the new features of the feedback effect. So I'll increase the scale a little bit so it's zooming in towards us. And in order to understand the changes to the feedback effect, let me first explain how the feedback effect works. So the feedback effect is basically taking whatever input is coming into it, and that represents the current frame. And then whatever's coming out of the feedback goes back in as another input to the feedback, which represents the previous frame. So we always have two frames of images that are being sampled, the current frame and the previous frame. So before we always had the amount, and the amount just is kind of like a level for how much of the previous frame gets applied, which creates a more intense feedback effect. And we always had the dry wet, which essentially just mixes between the affected signal and the dry signal. But we now have an input amount, which is the counterpart to the amount. So the amount affects the previous frame and the input affects the current frame. So when we stop current frame, it will fade to black. But it's worth noting this is different than just adjusting the amount or the dry wet, because this gives us kind of like a post fader sort of effect where we can kill the input and the effect still runs until it fades out, which is kind of cool. Also related to the way that this works with the previous frame and the current frame, we have the layer position, which is those two layers and how they're positioned. So as before, and what is always the default, is that the current frame gets layered on top of the feedback frame. Now we can swap the order. So the feedback is layered on top of the current frame. So our feedback image goes on top, which means if we dial up the amount, we see more of the feedback. And if we go all the way up, you can get some pretty cool results with this. But if the feedback amount goes all the way to the max, you can quite easily get to a whiteout situation like this. So just be careful with that. Either reduce the amount, or you can use the other new feature, which is the luma filter. So this sets the threshold for the brightness. So anything below this threshold will not get included back into the feedback signal. So when the amount is cranked all the way up, we can use this min luma to kind of tame the signal a little bit. And I think this leads to some pretty interesting results that were not possible without the layer position. So this is how it would have looked before. This is how it looks when we swap the order. So the next thing I want to show is, let's say I add another generator here. Let me change this composite mode, something a little nicer. So we always had the ability to change the level of individual generators. Like this, I can affect the lines. Here I can affect the cat, fade this totally out. But we never had the ability to change the level for the entire final image. So there's a new level control on the mixer that allows us to do just that. This is really valuable in a live situation where you have a controller mapped and you need to be able to fade to black. The other big new feature, which is probably the first thing that you notice when you open Chromatose for the first time now, is that the layout is fully responsive, which means on iPhone or iPad, you can now use the app in portrait mode. And if you're on an iPad and you have multitasking enabled, you can also drag this bottom right corner and resize the window. And as you resize the window, the controls will adjust to fit on the screen and the layout will be adjusted. So now we have a tiny little Chromatose, and you'll see that the screen now only allows for one panel at a time. But if we were on an iPhone using it in portrait mode, it would look something like this. If it was an iPhone in landscape mode, it would look more like this. And on the iPad, we can always tap this top left button, the green button, to go back into full screen mode. The other features we have are some new presets. So here's a simple color shift preset that shows a little bit how to use the new channels effect. There's a new Neon Dream preset, which makes use of the tunnel effect and has some cool macro knob mappings. There's a LED wall tunnel that looks like you're flying through a wall of LEDs. Cosmic Circus. And Jupiter. And we also have some updates to the existing presets with additional macros mapped to the Ancient Bardo preset, Copper Smoke preset, and the Rainbow Worm preset. And the last new feature we have is if you go into the settings, there's a new notifications tab. You can choose between any of the 3 types of notifications. You can turn these on, but only if share usage data is enabled. If this is disabled, all notifications will be disabled. So I won't be able to turn these on until I go back to the privacy settings and enable shared usage data. And the reason for that is because in order to send relevant notifications that are in the correct language and for the correct region, we need to have a little bit of information since we're not requiring user accounts. So that's why that's necessary. We don't track any personal information. Also, if you share usage data, it gives us a little bit of basic information about what screens are being used more often than others, which helps us to make the product better for you. So if you can enable that and the crash reports, it would really be a big help. That's pretty much it for this update. If there are other features that you'd like to see in a future version of Chromatose, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to check out our website. From there, you can read the full user manual with all the technical details. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay updated, which we send out about once every month or 2. You could also find us on our socials like Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, Discord. Through those channels, you can share your patches and videos that you make. We love seeing what people create with Chromatose. So hit us up there, let us know what you're doing. And at some point, we're also going to start sending out some links for additional patches that you can download, things that are not included in the app, some bonus content. So be sure to follow us there. Thanks for watching. See you next time.